Welcome to the Lightforge. This is Adwicta.
This is allergy, basically like ridden merps. I am
Hey,
I'm
spring is
dying.
here!
Yeah, spring is here. It is terrible.
This is
But
how I know spring is here. Whenever Merps gets crazy allergies.
yeah, it's really bad. This year the pollen levels are insane. I don't know if you well, this is
Well, it's
I don't
because
know
they
if this
were
is just
all
a
like holding it in, and holding it in and like holding it in, and it's like a month late, and now spring's finally here. They're just like now.
yeah, just unleashing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's like that movie with Mark Wahlberg. This is like the Earth's revenge, Except it's a much lamer version where they don't kill people and they just like make their eyes itch and throat itch, which is pretty bad. But anyways, we have a lot to talk about in the arena, so let's do that.
Yeah. So the first thing, okay. So this is not if you're looking for like deep meta analysis of the new meta. We gave you some last week. We'll give you a little bit this week, but that's not what really any of these two episodes are about. That's going to be next week's episode. We're doing okay in the meta, but I don't feel like we have like the most firm grip on it, and they like literally change the meta on us every week. So it's kind of hard to tell you something. Like last week was pretty easy draft Paladin. This week, Rogue seems to be doing a bit better. Paladin seems to be a bit down, but still very powerful. Mage is still doing fine. Hunter still looks like crap. But, we don't really know as much as we used to because the hotfix came in on Thursday night.
Tell us about the hotfix.
The hotfix, which we were widely expecting to come, because Arena was in kind of like a easy to make better state, and because Blizzard must have known that this was going to happen, right? Being such a new system and a new expansion, the first time 10.4 got an update, and they basically released the update on the exact day we predicted on the Lightforge, which was Thursday. And here's what happened in the hotfix. One, the thing that obviously had to be done and everybody widely expected them to do it, and they did it in the time frame that is pretty fast and is what we expected because of how fast they did it last time, which is that the card buckets have been updated. K and C cards are now in much more correct buckets.
No more Night Prowler in the super premium S tier.
Yeah, like we're not saying it's perfect. You see the Lightforge tier list. You can use that to make your conclusions about, whether things are still misbucketed or not. But like the really ridiculous ones are done. They've switched over a couple more, buckets for some of the other cards. KNC cards are generally more pickable now than they used to be. And so that's all good news. It also was really not a difficult thing for Blizzard to do. And they did it. So great on schedule. The next thing they did is that power levels are down very slightly because they say, like, quote unquote, I think literally, like, very slightly increased the offering rates of below average cards.
Yep.
We were in a good system before, and then they raised it moderately and they decreased it very slightly. And you can
Whatever these mean.
I mean, increasing it moderately seems to have a pretty big impact. Decreasing it very slightly, at least I haven't noticed a terribly large impact in the decrease of deck quality. But any small amount of decrease is welcome from where it was before. We don't know what they mean. We know generally what it means, but we don't know specifically what they did with the numbers. From the arena drafts numbers, it seemed like what 10.4 before the expansion was doing was taking the bottom two buckets and making it 75% and 50% respectively. And if you remember, the bottom bucket is like I think literally half the cards in the game. So they all are in one bucket. Like anything below average is that. So I don't know what happened if it changed from 75, 50% to 50, 25%. Now they bumped it back up a little or something. I don't know. But those are the ranges. You may feel it. You may not feel it. But Blizzard says it happens. We don't doubt them. And they will probably continue to tweak this until they get a power level they think is desirable. But the big news to come out of it isn't really that they bumped down the power level slightly. It's more that, like, at least right now, they're moving very cautiously and lowering the power level. They have not changed the power level back to where 10.4 after the hotfix was. And really, after 10.4, we could have used a little more power. That wasn't like that. We weren't at like the top level of how powerful decks can be before they get to like unplay. Skill doesn't really matter anymore. It's way too swingy and all that stuff. So we'll see how they balance it.
Yeah. So once again, they adjusted the buckets. very slightly, exact language, raised the appearance rate of below average cards, and they lowered the appearance of rare cards. And I think it's also telling, or not really, but so when we talked about the issues with the arena in last week's Lightforge, you especially mentioned that this is a systemic problem, and they needed to go back to just looking at all the changes that they've carried over, and just reevaluating each one, right? The spell bonus, all of these just sort of artifacts, right? And maybe during the time in which they were implemented, the idea was there, but now it just doesn't mesh, right? And still, right here, it seems like they're not doing that. They're still looking at this, and it's like, how do we kind of bandage up this issue? How do we sort of address this problem? And it was a very like huge issue of like too many steeds and just the power level. So once again, and look, I don't know if they're going to do that in the future, like go back to all the foundational changes that they made and reevaluate them. But at least for now, it's still sort of kicking the can down the road.
Right. I mean, they haven't made the fundamental changes necessary.
No.
Back when 10.4 first came out, I raised 5 issues. They solved 3 of them, which made Arena playable. And they didn't solve the other 2, and they still haven't solved the other 2. The first one being there needs to be some communication of what's happening. There isn't. This is really general, like, oh, we've kind of raised offering rates of bad cards a little, but it turned out to be a lot, or like moderately, and it turned out to be a lot, and now it's we've lowered it a tiny bit, and it seems like it's a tiny bit, but we don't really know. And I don't know if this basic or common thing should be read like we think that the patch writer was correct, in which case why no one has explained why that's even happening, or what that means for the neutral bonus, or just anything. Or it's more likely that it was miswritten, and then that still hasn't fixed the communication issue where we don't know where buckets, which things are in which buckets, and we're like forced to like ask arena drafts, for example. By the way, guys, if you aren't using arena drafts and you like us and you use our tier list for drafting, or for checking cards or whatever, go sign up for arena drafts. It's a very lightweight client. There's like no baggage attached to it. It doesn't slow your system down. And it records your stats on arena drafts, which is cool. But more importantly, it lets you see the Lightforge scores in the draft, and arena drafts gives us all of their stats. Like ZD Man does arena drafts. He's been a long-time supporter. We've been using their stats, and in today's meta, stats such as cards offering rates are more important than ever. So the more stats he can collect, the better it is for our algorithm. Because we need to know what cards are offered what. Blizzard doesn't tell us what cards are offered what, so we have to go around and get stats from somewhere. And I think ZD-Man's also creating a page that will release the stats to the public. So it's not like, or at least some summaries of the stats or whatever, right? Like just some information. It's not like this is top secret information or anything.
Because it shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be, right? But HS Replay releases some stats, but they're not specific enough for us to use in the algorithm, unfortunately. So I think arena drafts and ZD Man will release their own stats. So anyway, give it a try, see if you like it. We've been using it for like 2 years now, and we obviously like it. So anyway, back to the issue with arena. So I listed 5 things. 3 things were corrected. The other 2 things, one is communication of what the rules in the arena actually are, which we still don't really know. So that hasn't been done yet. Still waiting on that. And the other one is a smaller range for for the value of decks. So they now have a system where they know how good of a deck they gave each player, more or less, because they're literally telling you will have this many hits in the good bucket, this many hits in the great bucket, this many hits in the okay bucket, and all that stuff. So they can increase or decrease the variance in the decks they give people however they want. It used to be like, oh, we just kind of have to do it a certain way. Now it's a conscious decision to create a certain amount of variance. And since 10.4 has come out, the vast majority of good players have done a lot worse on average. They've done a lot more inconsistently, and that is a direct result of this variance issue, because Blizzard has now set the variance of decks. And whereas in prior metas, you draft with skills such as prioritizing drops versus greeds, figuring out what in the future may be more punishing. Like, there's a skill involved in drafting. And it's maybe not the skill that Blizzard wants people to have, because it's kind of a weird skill. It's like just learning the ins and outs of the system. But there's no more ins and outs of the system. Like, they fixed the bug that allowed people to use skill in drafting. In that sense, and they've increased a lot of other areas of drafting, creating a cohesive deck. But what does it mean to create a cohesive deck in 10.4? It means you go for some type of synergy, usually, right? Because why not? Because you have the similar value cards anyway. You make sure you get a curve if your deck needs a curve, and you make sure you get enough card advantage or whatever if your deck needs that. So it's not like it's a brain dead exercise, but again, it's if you separate people out on a tier of like a total noob is 1, an average player is like 5, and 10 are the top players. These are like skill levels around like 6 and 7, maybe even 8. These are not level 9, level 10 skills. So the top players that you see streaming and all of that are usually like level 10 players, and their stats have generally fallen back down to level 8 player stats. And that's because a lot of the skills they used to use have been removed, the higher level skills, and instead you're now much more focused, and you're getting repeated applications of these like level 6, level 7, maybe level 8 skills. The skill that it's replaced by, such as how to go for a synergy, is mostly not a skill. It's mostly like, if I'm going for a spell synergy, let's say like Merps tried to make a large spell mage the other day.
Right.
How many large spells was he offered? That's not a skill. That's literally Blizzard RNG giving you this stuff. And whereas that played a much smaller role in prior drafts, it's a pretty big role in this draft. Like, was his deck totally non-functional afterwards? No. But it was significantly weaker than other decks because he went for a synergy, as he should, as everyone does in you go for a synergy or an archetype, right? Because otherwise, what are you picking? Like, the difference in your card values you're given are pretty narrow these days. So besides arbitraging the few picks that are out of place and making sure you avoid the few cards that are out of place, the rest of your decision making, a lot of it has to do with how you build your deck. And so building a big spell mage is a risk, but it's a viable thing to do. He went for it. It didn't work. All of a sudden, you're going to have a bad deck.
Also, I just don't know like what the numbers are, right? Like, how much of a risk am I taking versus the reward, and exactly like all the small things.
Regardless of how much risk you're taking and the reward, the risk, Blizzard is controlling all that.
Right.
So even if you knew the risks, if you knew that some people are going to take the risks and succeed, and most people will, because that's the punish, right? Before, what was the punish to not drafting in a certain way in the beginning? The punish is that you have a non-workable deck at the end. So you don't take that punish. So you draft more conservatively. So the vast majority of top players drafted pretty conservatively. Because the punish, for example, for not having enough 3-drops or 4-drops in a Curvestone meta, let's say, was pretty damning, right? Like, you're going to lose a lot more.
Right.
On the other hand, the punish for not being greedy enough means you still have like an 8-win deck and you're fine. Now, that's not the case anymore, for better or for worse, but what's replaced that is this need for your deck to kind of come together. And the ability for your deck to come together is like very little to do with how you draft it, and much more to do with what Blizzard offers you. You can draft conservatively and make sure your deck is mediocre, but mediocre decks right now only go like very few wins compared to how far they used to go. Because it's so easy for people to go for synergies, because the punish for going for synergies is so low now compared to before. So anyway, the whole drafting thing, it's raised the skill level when it comes to, I think if you're comparing an above average player to a noob. But it has been very bad for like higher level skills, and there's definitely more RNG involved in the draft. Except now the RNG is not how many fireballs are you offered. Well, it is, but it's not like how the cards are being offered to you. It's more how the buckets are being offered to you. If you get more buckets, if you happen to get the synergies within those buckets that you were shooting for, you're going to have a really good deck. Your deck is going to win you games. Again, the main thrust of the point of my old post is that gameplay skill really doesn't matter as much anymore. And one of the big reasons gameplay skill doesn't matter anymore is Blizzard is kind of telling you how good your deck is. And they're creating such huge variances between the decks that are very, like, guaranteed when it comes to what they're offering you versus what you can pick. So you can determine which direction your deck goes, but whether it ends up successful or not is a lot more based on Blizzard than based on you, because the answer to that question that I just posed is always relative to how everyone else is drafting. And Blizzard has raised the floor of how bad a deck can be for everybody else. So, like, if you know something about how relative comparisons work, that means your RNG has been raised effectively. It's a little convoluted when it comes to explaining it. So I don't know if Blizzard realizes what's happening, or what's happened actually for a while now. But that's the result, and I think a lot of good players have picked up on it. You see a lot of complaints about the result, not the cause exactly. Besides like 10.4, but the result is that if you had a very good win rate before, or even if you're just a very good player before, it feels a lot harder to make an impact in the game. It feels much more like, well, I see how my deck turned out. Now I know what my wins are going to be.
Right.
Like, it's tilting more in that direction.
Even when you know, like, that's just not fun, right? That's not fun, and it also takes away from, like, the sense of accomplishment that you get. It's like when you see a deck and you can more accurately predict how it's going to do immediately. It's like, well, why am I playing the game? You know, like, it's like I'm just fulfilling the destiny of this deck, essentially. But this month has just been so volatile, right? In terms of, because it's not just about, so you basically talked about the fundamentals and how it has changed, sort of like, or how Blizzard now has more of the thumb on the scale, right? But also just, man, like, we have had so many changes. So not only have people had to adjust to these changes, and it's been like week to week, right? But Blizzard has also not been retiring the old decks. So you have this like mishmash sort of pre-hotfix versus post-hotfix, like pre-10.4 versus like post-10. And like you have all of these like different power levels, different offering rates, and all
they retired between 10.4.
Oh, yeah, okay. Right. The 10.4.
And they retired between the expansion coming out. But there were two segments.
Right.
Between, like, because whenever they hotfix something, they don't retire any decks. So there's two distinct, like, periods.
There were two times in which they didn't retire, which was first when they, just the power level went down, like, significantly.
Yeah.
Right. And then this time with the hotfix as well. So you do have this weird mixture, and then... so if you were trying to get consistency this month and trying, like, it was a really tough time. It was definitely a really tough time, and we will see stability at some point, right? Like, it won't always be week to week, but this was going to be kind of rocky no matter what. I think we could have predicted that, just because, new expansion and also just an entirely new way to draft, right? So.
Okay, but that's like a separate point than what I was talking about.
No, it is a separate point. I'm just saying, because you're saying basically the skill, like the skill ceiling or the skill impact of skill has been lessened. Right. And I'm just saying, sort of tangentially, that relates to just like the volatility.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, volatility's been high. It's going to get lower. As the expansion ages a bit, right? Like, first of all, Blizzard's already fixed all the buckets, supposedly, and they'll probably fix it again and, catch some of the things they've missed in this last hotfix, which we can't even tell you what they are because it's been so new. Like, we don't even have like enough stats or things to tell you what things are still misbucketed. The one last thing is something we talked about in the last Lightforge, and this I did not write in my post before because it wasn't really. I mean, I hinted at it, but I didn't like pound it in, and that's the spell and weapon bonus. It's we talked about it in the last Lightforge. I'm not going to keep beating the dead horse here, but it's literally double counting the purpose of the skill of the spell and weapon bonus, and that's not exactly, that doesn't really have anything to do with like skill or no skill, but it's just annoying that it's shaping so much of the, it literally affects the offering, it skews the offering rate of every single card by more than 50%, whether it's a minion or it's a spell, if you do it on a relative basis. So that's a lot. Like, it's quite a big impact on what the meta is. So that's just annoying to me personally, that effectively, like, someone didn't think something through well enough, and then the meta looks like this. Fine. But the more important part is really the other 2 points, which, I mean, Blizzard's known about those for a while now. And I don't mean that exactly all the decks have to be the same deck tier score according to Blizzard, but they should be within a small range. Right now, they've set it at a very wide range. And because decks are more determinative of win rate now than they were before, like, this is one of the reasons decks are more determinative of win rate than it was before. And this, like, because the determinative factor has gone up, this is also a bigger issue. So it's like a spiral. It's a negative feedback loop that makes Arena less and less skill based, and they can break it very easily. This is all in Blizzard's hands right now. They're like literally choosing not to break the cycle, and it's I hope they change their mind. There's nothing you could really say about it, because if Blizzard comes out and it's like, we just want Arena to be like coin flip, you win or you lose, and we want you to make more clicks than just a coin flip, so it's fun, and that's it, then there's still nothing you can do about that. But I hope that's not the direction Blizzard wants it to trend, and so even if it's not a narrow range of like all the numbers have to line up exactly the same, you want that range to be like much smaller than where they are right now by like at least 50%. Okay, so that's just what I want to talk about when it comes to what the hotfix actually did, which apparently we don't fully know, but because what Blizzard told us they did doesn't really make sense. And 2, what Blizzard still needs to do to make this thing actually like feel better, and like you're not just, I really like the phrase you use, the destiny of the deck.
The destiny of the deck, yeah, because it's just, you look at it and you're like, oh, this is going to do well, right? And all you do is fulfill the destiny of the thing.
It really does feel like that, like when I'm playing 10.4. And we know why, and we've known why since the very beginning. Remember, the things relating to the skill thing, that's stuff I posted literally within a week of 10.4 coming out. Once I figured out what they were doing with 10.4, I knew what the problems were. And they haven't fixed 2 of the 5 problems. So we're now in they fixed some stuff, it's kind of playable, but it's not, like, skill has an impact. It's not a huge impact, right? And again, I'm not talking about exactly the skill differentiation between 7 players and 3 players on the skill ranking. I'm talking about skill differentials between like 7 and 10. So if Blizzard's categorizing good players versus bad players, I don't think good players are like hurt as much by this as great players are. And in the same way, I don't think terrible players are punished by this system as much as bad players are punished.
Yeah. All right. So that's sort of the news about the hotfix. I think that was a good update / small little discussion.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about the shakeup at Blizzard?
Yeah. Why don't you start with there? I'll tell you the two headlines if you haven't heard. If Lightforge is your source of news for this, because really, I mean, from our perspective, because we're in this world and we look at everything like, oh my god, this was a huge deal each time it happened. It was all over Twitter, it was all over Reddit. Obviously, everyone knows. But like, if you're just playing the game and you listen to Lightforge or some other podcasts, you may not know until like next week's podcast, right? Mm-hmm. So first big news, and this is huge when it comes to Arena. This is bigger than the next thing, even though people probably think the next thing's bigger. Chalky You've heard him on the Lightforge earlier this in 2017 when he got number one in the arena, like his first time trying, and he's always been a brilliant player and obviously knows his stuff around arena as well. Chaki's joined Blizzard as part of their final balance team. So I don't care about the constructed implications, but here's the arena implication. Now, in their final balance team, they have one person who has been confirmed to be really, 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 really good at a limited format. They have
Yeah.
no other proven players on their entire roster for limited formats. They have proven players for constructed formats. They have people who, generally seem like who live constructed life. And Chaki is much more of a constructed player than a limited player, definitely. But at least you now have somebody who you know can beat the meta in arena and like sort of knows what arena is about, which seems like a very low bar for the final balance team, the people who are just supposed to be really good and smart about the game. But it's literally a bar that Blizzard has not passed until this point, until this hire, and it's a bar that keeps showing up. Right, every time we're like, oh, it's a pretty low bar, Blizzard can definitely pass it, and then they don't. And we're like, oh, that's right. People at Blizzard don't really know what they're doing with the arena. So hopefully, and we fully believe in Chaki, and we've had him on the Lightforge, and we met him in person at the Red Bull event. He's a great guy, very smart, and he obviously knows what he's doing in the arena. So this is a very, very important hire. Like, if the next expansion comes out and the next set of arena changes, like fundamental arena changes, fails, well, now we have someone to blame in a more direct fashion. Now it's like, Chaki, why didn't you stop this? We could say the rest of Blizzard balancing team doesn't know better, but you should know better.
Right. And he's on the final design team. So he's sort of like I don't know how they do things, but from the way that sounds is people sort of present like ideas, and then he gets like he's sort of like the final filter or one
He's
of
the
the
balance
final
team. So
gauges.
here's how
Yeah.
Blizzard works, right? They get a bunch of people who like create ideas, right? And then they create cards, and they're like, these are fun cards people are interested in, right? And they get a theme, and they like design an expansion. And then there's the final balance team that comes in and then says, oh, I know we designed this card as a 8 mana, but can it really be 7 mana? Because at 8 mana it's too much. Or like, this mechanic won't work because it'll combo with this particular mechanic, and it'll create this deck that we can't control. Like, that's what the
Right.
balancing team is for from a constructive perspective, and they also make arena decisions. But I'm pretty sure they're paying more attention now to arena than they used to, but it's still not like a major focus. But at least now when they run through their arena pass of like, what do you, for example, where do you put these cards in a bucket, right? Like, that decision is definitely not in the initial design team. That's going to be like at least someone in Chaki's position will have a say in that.
Yeah. So very exciting just to have someone with that level of expertise in the
Mm-hmm.
game, right? And who's shown like a very high level of critical thinking when it comes to this game, and has devoted I don't know how many hours to it. So that's very exciting. Congratulations to Chalky, and hopefully he finds lots of success there, and he's very happy there.
Yeah.
But we are also extremely excited about what the possibilities
Yeah.
for this.
And again, no one's saying Chaki's hired to be the arena guy at the Blizzard
No.
balancing team, but he has the most experience with arena out of anyone there just going in terms of play, just by virtue of the fact of having gotten number one in the arena.
Right. And it's really hard for anyone to sort of predict exactly what will happen when you release a card. But, like if you were to pick uh, like one person out of, the entire world, Chalky will be one of a handful of people that I would trust
Mm-hmm.
with this. So, yeah, it's very encouraging. I would like to say though, and this relates. You know what? Let's just talk about the next big thing, and then I'll
Yeah,
say
what's
what
the next big thing?
Ben Brode, the Ben Brode, the face of Hearthstone, the real life innkeeper of Hearthstone. That's really how I look at him. Like there is the virtual innkeeper, and then there's Ben Brode, who's the real life innkeeper. He might as well just be the human symbol of Hearthstone. Is leaving Team Five
Mm-hmm.
to start his own company and to I don't know the exact words, but basically he wants to create again. He wants to create a company, and he wants that feeling when he had, when he just started at Blizzard. So he will be leaving. Like we got hit with this news just very recently, and yeah, it's huge. I mean, you have the the head person for Hearthstone leaving, and not only that, like he wasn't just the person who was in charge of this game, and we knew who he was. He was the personality, right? Like
Yep.
he was the person who hyped up everything as well, and he was like the PR and the face of the game as well. So he will be leaving. I don't know when, but he announced it on Friday.
Yep. And Ben Brode obviously has been with Hearthstone the entire time. A lot of the initial decisions were made by him. He's still the boss around these parts. Whenever people have issues, they go to they go to Ben Brode. Although he's not, I presume, I have no idea, but I assume he's not like the driving force between of the balancing team for quite a while now. So it will be interesting how he's replaced. It will be
They
interesting
didn't
if
announce that yet, right?
they haven't announced that. Maybe
No.
he will not even be replaced. Maybe there won't be a game committee director anymore, and it'll just be run by committee, right? The way a lot of games are.
Right.
And so I don't know. It'll be interesting. Will it impact the arena? A lot of things. Like if he's the highest level person and he had certain ideas, we'll say this, right? Like arena has developed some since the beginning of Hearthstone, but out of every single card game I had ever seen or heard of, Hearthstone
Hmm.
has paid the least attention to their limited format
Yeah.
um, of any card game. So I'm not saying Ben Brode hates limited formats, but I'm saying he's clearly not a champion of limited formats, or else he would have made it happen because he's the guy, right? He's the guy for Hearthstone. So
Right.
this change, once you net out the effects of how bad or good this is for Hearthstone itself as an overall game, within the Hearthstone world itself, the relative balance between constructed and an arena or a limited format that will replace or be on top of arena or whatever can only shift in the direction of limited.
Yeah. I think it's safe to say that, and it's I think it's very accurate when you say like we don't know exactly what goes on in Ben Brode's brain. Probably a lot of loud laughing, but yeah, it's if you just look at everything that has happened since this game has come out, it's like what, almost 4 years, right?
More than 4 years.
More than 4 years now. Jeez.
I
Um,
mean, we're in April. Game came out in like March or something, right?
yeah, yeah. Oh, geez, you're right. But you're right. The limited format has really not been a focus. And for the first like 3 years, it just was pretty much ignored, with the exception of updating it for the expansions, right?
Yeah.
And in the past year, we've had a lot of tweaks and some balances with mixed results.
Mm-hmm.
But it has been tweaked. And I think that you kind of can't do less for the arena than they have, right? Because when they started moving things with the arena, that's when we also identify, we're just like, look, something has to be done. If it's not done, like arena will just like completely sink, right? Because it'll keep on going wild. It'll just have all of these like it'll just be unplayable. So it feels like what they have done nothing, and then what they've done is to just keep the ship like afloat.
Yep.
And whoever comes in, I think
At a bare
sort of
minimum, they're going to still keep the ship afloat.
exactly, yeah. But hopefully, they see this as something that has a lot of potential and something that has some systemic issues, has some problems, and they, make it a priority to fix these issues.
And it doesn't matter if it's arena or not. They could look at arena and say this is a fundamentally problematic design decision that may be good for the launch of the game, but is a horrible format for stuff that's maybe the next step in Hearthstone or whatever. And just create a new format for that. Like it's limited. You can do anything you want with limited format. Um, and limited, if you guys are, I presume people who are listening know limited format, but it's really like, because it's the opposite of constructed. Constructed means you get to pick the cards in your deck. Limited means you don't have full control over that.
Right.
So it's a pretty wide range, and Hearthstone has done minimal exploring of this range in. I mean, there is no competitive format for it, but even in like more just friendly gameplay, like competitive within the game, not competitive in like a esports kind of way, but even competitive within the game, there's been very little support for limited formats. So yeah, things can only look up, or at worst, they will stay the same. Now, that's not to say that Ben Brode may be the glue that was holding Hearthstone together, or maybe the person that was doing a lot really good efforts selling Hearthstone, or making sure other things are happening, and that Hearthstone itself doesn't suffer a major blow, so that even if Arena's in a relatively better position, it's still worse off for Arena that Ben Brode's leaving. That could certainly happen.
Oh, of course.
Like it's not like Ben Brode was bad for Hearthstone. Ben Brode was great for Hearthstone. And everybody misses it when he's gone. Everyone wishes him well when he leaves. But when it comes to looking at it from a purely arena perspective, from a purely limited perspective,
Mhm.
this can only be a good thing.
Yep, agreed. Now, I was gonna say, when because we're speaking sort of optimistically about these changes at Team Five, but you have to understand sort of the design timeline of Blizzard, and they've
Mm.
stated before that they create their expansion. They create basically expansions, 3 expansions early,
Well, they
right?
have ideas for 3 expansions early.
Right, right. But
It's not like things are
so
finalized like a year ahead of time.
no, no, they're not finalized, but I'm guessing, the theme and a lot of sort of the ideas are created. So while, we should expect some directional changes, some maybe, like changes in focus from Team Five, uh, do like just be aware that whatever changes we see, it's not like this person will come in and say next expansion
Yeah.
is going to be like
Yeah, no,
like
yeah, the
yeah,
results
yeah,
of this new person or new team or whatever, if they decide to do anything different at all, will still not be seen probably until 2019.
right, right. That's when they will have like a fresh canvas,
Yeah.
right? A completely fresh canvas. Because the next 3 expansions, what's going to happen is like a lot of things are already in place, are
Yeah.
already
Well, the
set
next
up.
2 expansions are definitely already in place because that's the rest of the Year of the Raven.
True, true. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure the expansion after that, especially because this expansion just launched, is in like a very preliminary phase that people can change, not too, you know, and especially because it's going to do so much to set the tone of the whole next cycle. Like, I think that's when we'll see the first changes. So, like, yeah, okay, like about a year from now, you'll either see or not see what the focus on limited format will be going forward in the post Ben Brode era.
Yep. Okay. Well, that's pretty cool. We wish Ben Brode well in
Mm-hmm.
his future endeavor. Whatever he creates, I think it's going to be pretty exciting.
Oh
So,
yeah, I'm definitely gonna play whatever game. Like, I don't even care if it doesn't sound interesting. Whatever game his new studio creates, I am at least playing that seriously for a bit, like
I'm sure
just to see
he,
what's happening.
right, I'm sure he will hype a lot of people up and be,
Yeah,
because he is really, really, really good at hyping stuff up and making you want to like get something, right?
mm-hmm.
Like, he was the master at hyping up all of these expansions. And Crip, like recently, also said, he's like, without Ben Brode, he's like, I don't think they're going to sell as many packs. Essentially,
Yeah.
it's like he is just such a natural at salesmanship. So we'll see. We'll see who else they bring in.
Okay. Do you have a question from the goat?
I do. So, question from the goat actually comes from our subreddit. If you guys are interested, it is the Grinning Goat subreddit. But this was asked by Hell Week more than a week ago, about a week and a half ago, because I have seen in recent Reddit threads people asking, it's like, oh, what are some resources for Arena? And sometimes people point them to our podcast,
Mm-hmm.
right? Which is appreciated. But Hell Week basically asked in our subreddit is like, what are the best Lightforge episodes to re-listen, right? And I can understand for some individuals who are sort of just tuning in now, they're just like, well, it's nice, but I want to listen to an episode that really helps me out,
Right.
right? Like helps me learn the arena. So I think for those of you just tuning in recently and want to, or don't want to listen to like all the episodes, which is totally understandable, I would point you to episode 92 and episode 93. Episode 92 is called The Learning Process. That's where I spend a lot of time just going through my turn planning and just breaking down exactly the thought process, right? Because at the end of the day, that's all it is. It's just preparing for your turn and then evaluating all the options and then implementing that in a timely fashion. So that's what episode 92 does. And episode 93 is the board is empty. You remember that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the one that you sort of captained, where you just present this the very basic situation where it's like, okay, the board is empty. What do you do? And
How
we
are
go
you
through
thinking about
options.
it? Like, what is your strategy here to eventually win?
Right. So I think beyond all of the meta podcasts that we do,
because
which
there is a problem, which is that if you go back and you listen to like podcast number 8 and it says 2 drops, like deep fried meta 2 drops, nothing we say there is wrong, but a lot of it is like inapplicable to the current meta, and you really want to hear a 2 drop discussion about 10.4 to really like figure that out. But the parts about playing the game, the parts about reading your opponent, the parts about how to think about things, like those are consistent.
Yep.
So yeah, those are some good ones. There's some other ones as well. We do a really horrible job of keeping track of our Lightforges and what each one is really doing. Because I think initially when we started the Lightforge, we're like, oh, we're gonna have a discussion about 2 drops. Now we're done. Oh, we're gonna have a discussion about this. Now we're done. Like the meta may change, but arena can only change so much. And then kind of the last year happened. And it was like arena can actually change a ton once they start changing with the fundamental offering rules of the arena. Mm-hmm. Like arena without changes in offering rules can only change so much, and everything we say is going to be true forever. But once they change offering rules, now you're in a different game, right? And 10.4 really made that the forefront of all discussions, right? Of how bucketing is happening and how drafting is happening and how your draft, if draft is destiny in 10.4 and you're only so much in control of your draft, whatever control you have over your draft is kind of the game now. And you're really only going to get that on the Lightforge in the 10.4 meta, right? Yep. Even if you go like 3 months back, we're not going to talk about 10.4. We're going to talk about a bunch of stuff that's probably still applicable, but not like anywhere near as important for this meta as it was for the last meta. So if you're listening to the past Lightforges, beyond hearing our wonderful voices, everything we say is true, but keep in mind the context it was said in. So even if it's true today, like if we say 3-2s are really good against 3-3s, and you have to watch out against about 3-4s, well, that's like a true statement. And it's decently applicable to this meta, but you also now have a caveat that sometimes you don't need 2s at all, which was probably not true when we said that. And if you were in the prior meta, in the KNC meta, you don't really have to worry about 3-4s at all, because there were no 3-4s. So just keep in mind of the new context that you're applying this in.
Yep. All right. So just basically listen to those 2 episodes if you're just beginning. I think those 2 episodes of 92 and 93 are a very good place to start. Yeah. Anyways, you want to move on to Card Good Bad?
Card Good Bad. Haven't done one of these in a while. Card Good Bad, Phantom Militia. I feel like a lot of people want to talk about this whenever it pops up.
We've talked about it a decent amount, but I think we should just address it head on.
We have talked about it a lot, but we need to talk about it more, I think, because it's one of those. So 2 things are actually happening with Phantom Militia. One is it is a card that was rated pretty highly by Blizzard in their bucketing, was rated pretty highly by us. A lot of people did not fully agree, and the stats initially looked very bad, and now they're pretty good. I don't know if they're like, up to as high as we rated, but they're getting there as people figure out how to use this card. And so we'll talk about how to actually use this card. But one thing I do want to bring up is that there's some. It's fundamental. It's going to change all the card ratings on the Lightforge, but every time I think I'm done with this algorithm thing, at least for finding card scores, I think of one more thing that will make everything so much better. And this is the last time that we're going to do it for this version before we come out with an actual drafter. Just because it's gotten to the point where we're just refining things, and we'd rather have a drafter product to refine now than just making the tier list better. But something's going in, and it's going to change everything a little bit and make it a bit better. And one of the results is that a lot of the cards that generate a lot of tokens or a lot of multiple hits are going to go down a bit. And the cards that are being added to your hand at a specific mana cost that is low are going up a bit. So, like, people keep saying, like, Gibber is low, and we agreed with that. Some other things that add 1 mana cards are a little low on our tier list. So all that is getting addressed, and it's in the same, like, I like elegant solutions. So I'm trying to find always the underlying reasons why all these things may be true. So that's something that's coming. And as a result, because Phantom Militia could potentially generate multiple things, Phantom Militia will go down a bit. I really don't think it's going down below a 120 though. So it's not like it's going to fall out of the range of where it's at. But anyway, why don't you talk about how to play Phantom Militia? I just want to give people a heads up, so it's not like we talk card good, bad, and why Phantom Militia is so great, and then we lower the card 5 points. Because in the next update, like, really, a lot of things are changing. But by a little, like, all by a little. What's like Worm will probably change by a lot because it generates a whole ton of 1/1s. Grim Necromancer will probably go down by a little bit, right? Like, that new card that puts 2 1/1s in your hand, that's gonna go up a bit, like, significantly. But for the most part, all the cards are gonna move by like 2-3 points, and we don't even show you changes that are 3 points or below. So, like, on the change log, so you may not even like see it happening on the change log.
Yep. So Phantom Militia, for those of you who are not aware, is a 3 mana 2/4 taunt with Echo, and that means you can play it over and over again on the same turn as long as you have mana. So how you play Phantom Militia and when is it good, right? Because that's the question. Like, how do you play it and when is it good? First of all, let's just establish there will be a decent amount of time in which you just play it on turn 3 because you have to, right? Because you have to play it, and it's a squirming tentacle, and that's kind of fine. Like, it is what it is. But where the card becomes good is obviously, you have an extended ability to play it on turn 6 or turn 9 or beyond that multiple times, twice or 3 times. What Phantom Militia is good at and the situations in which it's good at, I think 2 kind of stand out. Number 1 is when you are in a situation in which it's kind of like a slow game and you know that your opponent has a lot of responses in their hand, and it's like turn 9 and you're like, man, I don't want to play into their AoE. At the same time, I don't want to play into like mind control, or something like that. And it's like, well, what do? I don't really want to like give them good options. Phantom Militia is great in that case, right? You just use 1 card and put out these really annoying 2/4 taunts, and you know that your opponent can't say like, aha, he played, like anti-tempo, now I'm going to super tempo out and overwhelm him. First of all, maybe that's exactly what you want. And second of all, like, you've already made the read that your opponent just has like all of these responses because of the bogus stole bonus in the draft. See, I'm relating this to what we said. So that's a good scenario to play Phantom Militia. And the second one, when you don't have AoE and they're rushing you down, and I've had this a lot where, I'm trying to play the aggro as well. And on turn 6 or turn 9, they just play, double Phantom Militia or triple Phantom Militia, and it's pretty effective. Like,
Double Phantom Militia taunts at least 8 damage. Triple Phantom Militia taunts at least 12 damage.
Right. And it's even more annoying than just like a Sleepy Dragon, because you can just remove Sleepy Dragon with 1 spell, right? Like, it is a singular minion. And yes, like Phantom Militia is susceptible to AoE, but AoE is a lot harder.
It's pretty
And
rare these days,
remember,
AoE, actually.
very right, very rare. Like Fellfire is gone, like Dragonfire is gone, right? Like we're missing some AoE. Also, like Corrupted Seer is
Yeah,
gone, like
and if you
neutral
look at
AoE.
like the popular classes, the two
Mhm.
most popular classes are probably like what Paladin and then like Mage, Rogue. I think those are like
Yeah,
the three most popular classes again. And Rogue has no AOE, and Paladin has Consecration, and that's it. And Mage has AOE. Like
right.
this is no longer the meta where every class has a whole ton of AOE.
Yep. And so once again, it's a great situation to just sort of say, all right, I don't really have AoE, but if they are sort of spreading out, you can play Phantom Militia. And also, you can play Phantom Militia as a setup to your own AoE, right? You play that, and then they have to like dink all of their minions into there, and it weakens up everything. And then you play your follow up AoE. Once again, we've gone through setting up for your AoE, right? We've talked about in the last Lightforge. Phantom Militia is great for setting up your AoE as well. So those are the times in which Phantom Militia really shine. And I will say I've gained appreciation for this card because when I play, I'm like, it's really annoying. Like, yes, it is anti-tempo, but we are in a meta in which you don't need to tempo out all the time. You just need to create situations that really annoy your opponent, right? And Phantom Militia is very good at doing that.
Yeah, there's basically a lot of like outside of the turn three, like it's a decent card on curve, not great kind of like move. It's a great way to play in any awkward situation. Like if
Mm-hmm.
you're afraid of overextending, well, it's only one extra card, right? You don't have to play multiple cards on it, but you still get to put on the pressure. If you're afraid of a hard removal, this is a great way to get a bunch of other stuff. If you need to protect a one particular card, this will generate a lot of taunt protection onto your like combo or snowball card or whatever. If you need to stall for a turn, this will give a ton of card, like a ton of taunt speed. There's just like so many situations for it to be useful later on.
Right.
And the 3-drop potential is just a bonus. Like you only play that if you have nothing else to play, or if they played a 3-2, for example, and you're debating between playing that or a 3-3. Um,
Yep.
and that flexibility is insane. And as you play more with it, you're going to get a better feel for it and when to save it and when to play it for tempo. One trap to not fall into, though, is don't think just because it's after turn 3, you always have to play 2 copies of it or 3 copies of it if you have the
Yeah.
mana. That's like the problem that noobs fall into so much. This is the reason why Lone Champion will never, ever, ever have the win rates that it deserves, and it will always be underbucketed. Because what a bad player will do is they will hold this card until the board is clear, and then they will play it, and then they will get the value. But a good player will play this card like, I don't know, at least a third of the time, if not more, just as a 2-4 regular card Lone Champ. Why? Because they just need the tempo then, right? Because they're looking at how much damage they can deal on their opponent's face, because they're calculating that if they don't have the tempo, they can't remove the opponent's next minion on the board, because they're kind of out of options. They'll do that. And it's the same with Phantom Militia. Even if it's turn 9 and you can play 3 Phantom Militias, if you have a 6-drop and you really want to play the 6-drop, it's okay to play that 6-drop and a Phantom Militia just as a 2-4 taunt. Like,
Yeah.
that's not a horrible move at all, and it gives you that option. Like, that's why Phantom Militia is good. And yeah, I know it's gonna, like, depending on where you are on your, like, journey to become a great player at Hearthstone Arena, it may be difficult to see the situations in which that is good or in which that is better than saving it for value. Because honestly, when you get to the late turns, it's usually correct to save it to play it all in the same turn. Usually. But that's what
Yeah.
differentiates like a good player from a mediocre player, right? Like if you can recognize those other like 25% scenarios in which you do want to play the Phantom Militia as a 1 copy of and just ignore the echo effect, or to play 2 copies of it and do something else with your other 3 or 4 mana.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Just watch out for those situations in which you want to extract a lot of value from it because it's not that much value. Like, understand this. It's like it's not one of those cards in which if you wait, you're like getting supreme
Yeah.
value, right? the quote value of this card comes from its flexibility and from its ability to sort of create an annoyance slash problem for your opponent. It's not like insane card value or anything. So.
Yeah, it's a hard card to play. So if you don't use its flexibility and the card is because of its flexibility, like you're just not going to get the value out of this card. Yeah. But if you do use the flexibility, then there you go. There's actually there's a concept where we're building into the drafter that will. I don't want to spoil too much of it. You know what? I'm not gonna say anything.
You're gonna be that guy.
I'm gonna be that guy.
You'll
see when it comes out. This is definitely gonna make it into the first build. It's probably going to, like, to be honest, it'll probably come out in the tier list before we have a drafter. Like, just as a thing.
You are the worst.
Anyway,
okay. Right.
Let's move on to class talk. We're playing Paladin today, right after they slightly nerfed the Paladin. Slightly. Win rates are still high. Right. It's no longer over 55%, but it's a healthy 54.4%. Rogue win rates are up now to 53.8%, which to me means Rogue is probably better than Paladin now in this meta. And everything else is kind of where they were. Warlocks are doing significantly better now than they were before the hotfix. But other than that, I don't really see a lot of other win rates moving, at least. So the meta is still not like hugely unchanged. But like we said, right, we predicted this. We predicted Paladin Rogue, or we predicted Rogue Paladin, but those were the two most likely to be great classes. And as they're fiddling around with the numbers, that's kind of what's happening. So right now for Paladin, we talked about it in Steed, like Steed versus Steed, more Steeds. They hotfixed a lot of things to basically make sure you don't have as many Steeds as before, but that doesn't matter because your bucketing is similar, and so you're just going to pick Outdoors and Vine Cleavers and other great stuff instead. Like, you're still a Paladin, your cards are still overpowered.
Yep. That's a good way to summarize it. Yeah. So Paladin, still really, really good. Pick it.
Yep. And in terms of drafting a Paladin, now that you can design your Paladin, again, I still don't like 2-drops for Paladins. I don't think the meta's fast enough that you need 2-drops. So pick it for value only, and if you have other bad choices, or you have a synergy and it just happens to be a 2-drop. But if you can, take the 1-drops. And I would shy away from things with 1 health. So it's like this weird balancing act you have to do with Paladin, where you need to be on the board. Off the board Paladin does not exist right now. But to be on the board, you have to balance your inefficient 2s with your 1s that are very vulnerable to Rogue and Mage. Like, that's the problem with having a 1-drop that has 1 health. You're very vulnerable to Rogue, and you're pretty vulnerable to Mage. And Rogue and Mage comprise of as much of the meta as Paladin does. And even with Paladin, right, the opponent just hero powers. You better have a follow-up. So it's a little awkward to do 1-drops with 1 health. But if you have, like, premium 1-drops, you know, like a Righteous Defender or something, like, that still works. Or if you have, like, a 1-3 or something, those are also decent 1-drops, I think, for the Paladin.
Cool.
All right. Great. Of course, like, Light's Justice, right, is the perfect 1-drop, because there's no way anyone can remove it without, like, weapon removal. All right. That's it. That's it from us at the Lightforge. Next week, please tune in for a more deep meta analysis. There will be a deep fried meta. We will be talking specifics about drafting. Not gameplay, because gameplay doesn't matter all that much anymore, but about how to draft. And we'll try not to focus on any particular class, even though it's drafting class by class is more of a thing now than it used to be. But we'll do a whole focus on the current meta, the Witchwood meta, and how to draft.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, great. Until next time, this is Abwikta.
This is Merp. See you guys.
All right.
Okay.
Forgot to thank the patrons.
Oh, yeah.